Modern society is cluttered with people who have no skin in the game. And that's a big problem because people who have no skin in the game lack incentive to be fair and just. Skin in the game is a worldview that applies to every dimension of our lives. In a nutshell, do not trust, take advice from, or do business with people who have no skin in the game. But if you must, use caution. A quick overview about the book. Nassim Nicholas Taleb was considered a modern prophet of sorts when his bestseller The Black Swan predicted the 2007 economic recession. Now, Skin in the Game, his newest book, is considered to be his most provocative and practical work yet. And in this book, Taleb redefines the modern way of understanding the world. And he offers critical insight into the best ways that people can contribute to a fair and just society while influencing each other for the better. By citing examples from the beginning of history, the Hebrew Bible and the Code of Hammurabi, all the way to the 2016 election of Donald Trump, Taleb builds a compelling case about the importance of risk and reward. In his view, a willingness to accept personal risk for a situation is a critical character trait of those society considers to be heroes and saints and successful, moral individuals in general. In other words, skin in the game tells us to refrain from trusting anybody that will not put their own security on the line. Living with the consequences of real risk is what's necessary for fairness and justice to prevail in our modern culture. Here's what you'll learn about in this book summary. Why the minority so often rule the preferences of the majority. Why ethical rules are not universal. We'll talk about Taleb's reasons why it's possible to be an intellectual but still an idiot. We'll talk about why you shouldn't ever trust someone's opinion if they stand to gain from your decision. We'll discuss the importance of having skin in the game for making decisions for greater society. We'll discuss why true religion is a commitment, not just a faith. And we'll talk about why you should distrust complicated solutions that someone else was paid to find. We'll talk about all of this and much, much more in this audiobook summary. But first, a few crucial quotes from the book before we dive into the big ideas. Quote number 1. If you do not take risks for your opinion, you are nothing. Quote, those who talk should do, and only those who do should talk. Quote, the curse of modernity is that we are increasingly populated by a class of people who are better at explaining than understanding, or better at explaining than doing. And the final crucial quote, by definition, what works cannot be irrational. About every single person I know who has chronically failed in business shares that mental block. The failure to realize that if something stupid works and makes money, it cannot be stupid. Big idea number 1, setting up the idea of skin in the game. Taleb tells us that the knowledge we get by tinkering via trial and error, experience, and the workings of time, in other words, contact with the earth, is vastly superior to that obtained through reasoning. Something self-serving institutions have been very busy hiding from us. Now, the central premise of skin in the game is that those who make decisions should also have to live with those decisions' consequences, the consequences of those decisions. Taleb states that in academia, there is no difference between scholarship and the real world, but in the real world, there is. This means that those who get rewards from a particular decision or behavior should also experience some of its risks. Otherwise, other people are paying the price for their mistakes. Taleb notes that roughing up your skin a bit, getting those calluses, is essential to the process of learning and discovery. For instance, burning your hand on a hot stove is an instant lesson learned never to touch one again. In Greek, this is called pathmata mathemata, learning through pain. The opposite of skin in the game is bureaucracy. Why? Because it insulates people from the consequences of their actions. Taleb is especially against things like government bailouts in the free market because they interfere with the system and prevent people from actually feeling skin in the game. If a big company, big pharma, or one of the big auto dealers in the U.S. gets bailed out by the government, well, then they don't have to feel the pain of having to rebuild everything that they messed up. The government took care of it for them. So in the same way, Taleb believes the only way to learn is through experience. It's impossible to convince someone that they are wrong until they actually experience it for themselves. This is why some of us allow our children to fall down and then get back up, because they learn from their experiences. Now, the modern world, it values academia, though, meaning that most people are better at explaining than understanding or doing. And this prevents progress because evolution isn't possible without skin in the game, without messing things up a bit, fixing them a bit, tweaking here, tweaking there, and evolving as such. And for these reasons, Taleb recommends avoiding taking advice altogether from someone who advises for a living, especially if they are positioned to profit from your decision. Big idea number 2. Who is held accountable? Quote, beware of the person who gives advice, telling you that a certain action on your part is good for you, while it is also good for him, while the harm to you doesn't directly affect him. Unquote. Taleb tells us that a good rule for an ethical world is that you need to eat what you feed other people. This follows what's known as the silver rule, which is, don't do to others what you would not want to have done to you. According to Taleb, it's possible to give advice or to sell, but it's not ethical to try to do both at once. This leads to a conflict of interest for the advice giver and can affect their downside risk. This principle is often shown through medical treatment. A patient with cancer might be given a choice between laser surgery and radiation. Now, statistically, laser surgery tends to have worse 5-year outcomes than radiation. But radiation tends to create second tumors over time, leading to a higher chance of condition-specific fatality over 20 years. But because medical experts tend to value 5-year rates over 20-year rates, almost all cancer today is treated with radiation. This is because the risks are statistically lower for the doctor to punt your health problems far into the future. Now, if you were to drop dead a few weeks after treatment, the doctor might be sued for negligence. They're less likely to be blamed if you suffer complications at a later date in the future, far off into the future, even if they are directly tied to the condition being treated. In other words, long-term medical risks are hidden, but legal risks are immediate. Doctors will work to avoid these risks, even at the cost of the patient's health over time. Big idea number 3. Asymmetry between the individual and the collective. Quote, you will never fully convince someone that he is wrong. Only reality can. Unquote. How can you understand how ants work? Studying individuals will never give you insight into how the overall colony works, meaning that it's essential to consider both the whole and the individual at once. In the same way, understanding how trends and behavior changes pass through society comes from the individual's influence on the collective, especially in the case of the intransigent minority. These are people with significant amounts of skin in the game, meaning that they work hard to push agendas that make sense for them, like having kosher meat in grocery stores, for instance. And then once these populations reach even 3 or 4% of the general population, Taleb tells us they can become enough of an influence that the entire community needs to submit to their preferences. This same principle is shown by the spread of automatic cars around the world today. Their popularity isn't necessarily a sign that they are the preference of the majority. Instead, Taleb tells us it's a sign that people who can drive a manual can drive an automatic as well, while the reverse is not necessarily true. Keeping automatic cars around is, therefore, easier than the alternative, which is manual. Likewise, the popularity of McDonald's might be based more on the fact that it's a safe, consistent choice, no matter where you go, that lets people know exactly what to expect, no matter where they are around the world. They know they're going to get the same thing. They order a Big Mac, they're going to get a Big Mac. They order fries, they're going to get fries. It's not going to be a mystery meat every time that they order. They're going to get consistent quality, even if that quality isn't necessarily the best. Now, this same principle also explains the historical spread of some religions. Under Islamic law, a non-Muslim man must convert to Islam to marry a Muslim woman, and their children will also be Muslim. In contrast, children are only considered Jewish if their mother is Jewish, which has somewhat hindered the spread of Judaism. Now, this evidence shows that the formation of moral values in society today doesn't come from majority consensus. Instead, Taleb says that a small number of intolerant or stubborn individuals are capable of imposing their ideas on everyone else and moving their agenda forward. And according to Taleb, the Western world's tolerance for intolerance is putting it in the process of committing suicide. The underlying structure of reality matters much more than the participants, something policymakers fail to understand. Under the right market structure, a collection of idiots, he says, produces a well-functioning market. Big idea number 4, wild wolves among domestic dogs. Quote, "What matters is not what a person has or does not have. It is what he or she is afraid of losing." Unquote. To illustrate this big idea, Taleb tells us the story of the dog and the wolf. A dog boasts to a wolf of all the comforts he has: 3 square meals a day, a few treats thrown in between meals, and, the best part, he doesn't have to hunt for any of it. In fact, it's served to him on a silver platter. Well, a silver dog bowl, that is. But other than having a belly full of food and all the leisurely time in the world, the dog tells the wolf that he's even got humans who show him love and affection, something the dog absolutely loves. And so, the dog continues gloating to the wolf about the abundance of comforts and luxuries he gets to enjoy, enticing the wolf so much that he starts thinking about leaving the wolf life behind him and embracing the way of the dog instead. That is, of course, until the wolf asks about the collar tied around the dog's neck, a collar that the dog must wear at all times, put in place by his owners. After learning about what the collar is used for, the wolf is absolutely shocked and mortified. He looks at the dog and he says, "Of all of your meals, I want nothing." And then the wolf turns in the opposite direction and boom, starts running away. And he's still running in whichever direction he wants to because he has his freedom. So the question is, what would you rather be? A dog or a wolf? Because the bottom line is freedom is never free. It comes with risks. Sure, by running away in the wild, the wolf accepts all manner of risks, from being attacked to going hungry to being subjected to harsh weather conditions. But the wolf has his freedom, something the dog does not, and probably never will. Taleb tells us that most employees are as submissive to their bosses as dogs are to their owners. He tells us that being an employee is a sign of domestication, signified by a person's willingness to give up their personal agency for 9 hours a day for years upon years upon years on end. He says that this makes company men, quote unquote, little different in their behavior than an obedient, housebroken dog, but not a wolf. And so Taleb tells us that employees do have skin in the game in the sense that they need to remain employable. They work hard not to upset their employer and upset potential future opportunities for employment as well. Moreover, in Taleb's mind, one of the most dangerous things you can do is pretend to be a wolf while you're actually being a dog. People are going to see right through it if you're pretending to be rogue and on your own, and if you don't have real skin in the game. You certainly will not be taken seriously if that's the case for you. And a good sign of a real wolf is someone who's willing to swear and say whatever they want in public forums like social media. It's a funny way of telling the world that they're free, that they're self-owned. And here's the point Taleb's trying to make here with this example. The thing that matters is not what someone has or what they can do. It's what they are afraid of losing. Many companies would fire or reprimand an employee for cursing or speaking her mind whenever she wants. But what if you were so indispensable to your employer that they would be losing money without you? Then you might be able to speak your mind without worrying about company politics or getting fired. Someone who doesn't fear losing her job or status, she says what she wants, when she wants, and however she wants. Now, this leads to the ironic truth that the biggest indicator of a free man or woman is a willingness to adopt the customs and habits of the lower social classes, lousy clothing, bad manners, etc., because the consequences of their actions have no real ramifications for them. Now, what does this mean for the real world? According to Taleb, people whose job survival depends on qualitative job assessments from a higher-ranked manager shouldn't be trusted for making critical decisions. They have too much invested in the outcome. Now, Taleb also notes that not all employees are dogs. It is possible to be both employed by a company and be a wolf at the same time, but in the corporate world, the percentage of dogs far outweighs the percentage of wolves. Which prompts a question worth asking yourself. Are you a dog or are you a wolf? And if you're the former, do you care enough to do something about it? Big idea number 5. Being alive means taking risks. Quote, scars signal skin in the game. Unquote. In today's world, society tends to value failed real people more than perfect yet abstract ideals of people. Though Donald Trump was bashed as a failed entrepreneur during the 2016 election, Taleb says that this only succeeded in bolstering his reputation with his base. In this way, blemishes and character flaws increase the distance between humans and ghosts, and people prefer to interact with other people. In the same manner of ghosted, blemish-free outcomes, today's psychology studies can be replicated less than 40% of the time. Financial reports often have the predictive quality of astrology, and much dietary advice has been thoroughly reversed in the past 30 years. This means that the intuition of your instincts, your gut instinct, and the guidance of your grandma has a higher likelihood of withstanding the test of time than these quote-unquote scientific findings. In Taleb's mind, this is because policy-making goons conducting studies and providing advice are just too removed from the game to think through its ramifications over time. It's too abstracted where they're standing. They don't have enough skin in the game, if any at all. And for these reasons, Taleb proposes that what people should most resent are people at the top of the hierarchy without any skin in the game. Without bearing risks that could topple someone like this from his post, his decisions must be challenged or understood as out of touch. In his view, the way to make society more equal is to force the super rich to put skin in the game, ensuring that they are subjected to the risks of leaving the 1%. Big idea number 6. Stereotypes should be trusted for the wrong reasons. Quote, if your private life conflicts with your intellectual opinion, it cancels your intellectual ideas, not your private life. Unquote. It's a common truth that someone working in an industry who does not fit a commonly accepted stereotype for it might in fact be better suited for it than anyone else. This is because they needed to work harder to impress others, beat the credentials of those around them, and get past stereotypes about their aptitude. Thanks to the presence of some skin in the game, they achieved what others did not think they were capable of. To illustrate, Taleb says that if he had to undergo surgery and had his pick of surgeons, he would choose the scraggly, unkempt surgeon over the polished one with Ivy League degrees on his wall any day of the week. Likewise, it's all too common for the medical world to take more substantial steps than necessary for their interest in alleviating risk. Taleb tells us that it took medicine a long time to realize that headaches are usually best treated with aspirin, not brain surgery, despite the operation seeming more scientific and impressive. Unfortunately, consultants, certain academics, political analysts, economists, and many other professions that benefit from complexity rather than simplicity haven't made the same logical leap yet. Why? Because they will keep getting paid if the systems they create are too complicated to understand, which means that they, the so-called experts, are the ones that do the explaining. For a price, of course. But, as Taleb explains, simplicity has a far better track record than complexity does. And this principle of simplicity extends to many dimensions of life. For example, most people think hamburgers taste better than filet mignon because of the higher fat content in the burger. But the perceived scarcity of expensive cuts of meat cause people to value a $50 filet mignon at Morton's Steakhouse more than they value a $4 burger from In-N-Out, even if they know they'd rather have the burger. Taleb is also convinced that most people are happier living in close quarters with other people. But the super rich are heavily pressured, social and otherwise, to move into mega mansions far away from their neighbors instead, in an effort to achieve status. Taleb's advice is to evaluate the ways wealth affects your life. If making more money is giving you fewer options instead of more options, you're doing it wrong. In the business world, problems arise in fields where workers don't have the requisite skin in the game required to keep them accountable to their customers. Restaurant owners have major skin in the game because they've got a daily vested interest in keeping their customers happy. But journalists, Taleb tells us, do not have skin in the game because they can report inaccurate information based on bias, and they can do so without suffering the consequences of the actions people take based on that inaccurate information. Moreover, Taleb tells us it's immoral to claim virtue without fully living with its consequences. Class privilege and socioeconomic inequality is easy for college students to talk about, but it's difficult for them to act against once they enter the working world. Taleb believes that sticking up for unpopular truths is a virtue because it will cost you your reputation, a sign of having skin in the game. And for those people who want to, quote-unquote, save the world or do something for mankind, Taleb recommends the following tips. Do not engage in virtue signaling. Intentionally expressing moral values to make yourself look good in front of others, even if you don't believe in those values. Next, do not participate in rent-seeking. When a company spends money to gain something from another organization without creating any value as a result of having done so, that's called rent-seeking. Some examples. When big companies pay lobbyists to persuade or pay politicians to pass laws that result in higher paydays for the company, but nothing for anyone else. Another example, when the U.S. government bails out big banks and automakers. Next, put yourself on the line by starting a business. Starting a business, Taleb says, is the ultimate expression of skin in the game. If you succeed, you succeed. But if you fail, it's on you. Big idea number 7, religion and skin in the game. Quote, belief requires an entry fee. Unquote. The idea of belief without sacrifice is relatively new in history. In centuries past, the sign of true devotion was putting skin in the game as a worshiper. However, when Pope John Paul II was shot, ambulance drivers never considered taking him to a chapel for prayers instead of a hospital for treatment. Rather shockingly, they would have been considered treasonous to the Pope's best interest if they even discussed it. Likewise, the line between atheists and the religious isn't as big as it once was. Atheists are likely to take part in yoga, meditation, and other practices generated to create a feeling of awe, even without religious connotations. Taleb categorizes some people as atheists in action and religious in words. Most Orthodox and Catholic Christians are like this, he says. Others are sacred in actions and words, suicide bombers, but states that he doesn't know any category that is atheist in both action and in words. Again, he categorizes some people as atheists in actions and religious in words, others as sacred in actions and words, but states that he doesn't know any category whatsoever that is atheist in both action and in words. These people would be devoid of all ritual and superstition, like a belief in economics, and they don't exist in today's world. In other words, your religion will control your actions in specific ways, no matter what it is. Whether or not it will require you to put skin in the game is a different question entirely. Big idea number 8. Risk and rationality brings rewards. Quote, unless you are perfectly narcissistic and psychopathic, even then, your worst-case scenario is never limited to the loss of only your life. Unquote. Survival comes first. Truth, understanding, and science come later. This means that you do not need science to survive, but you must survive to do any science. It's Taleb's opinion that religion exists to enforce tail risk management across generations, creating unconditional rules that are simple to teach and easy to implement. In other words, what is rational allows for survival. Anything that hinders survival for an individual, community, tribe, or other group is by definition irrational. In evolutionary terms, it's better to look at how traits heighten the odds of survival for certain species, not how they compete with each other. Another way to put it is that not everything that happens for a reason, but everything that survives for a reason. This idea is further enhanced then with ensemble probability and one-time probability. The first is concerned with a collection of people, and the second a single person over time. These differences make a significant difference in how predictions, like the impacts of the stock market, will actually affect you as an individual, not just society as a whole. In Taleb's view, no individual can get the same returns of the market unless they have an infinite amount of money to play with, and losses won't take them out of the game altogether. Survival is the most critical component of succeeding, and the collective has a far better chance of surviving than the same individual exposed to risk over and over and over again. To put it simply, rationality is working to avoid systemic ruin for all involved. Closing notes. The key takeaway from Skin in the Game is this. In the book, Nassim Nicholas Taleb explores the asymmetries in human interactions to help you understand how gaps in certainty, risk, fairness, and potential reward are actually created, and how you can close them so that everyone is affected by the consequences of their actions in some capacity. Actionable insights? The necessary competency for winners depends on the industry that they are part of. Even a minority of 3 to 4% of the population can rule the majority. The wealthiest people are often the easiest to scam because they have less to lose. The community is always at lower risk than the individual. Religion often requires some sacrifice. And finally, those within an industry who do not fit its stereotypes are often the best at it. And finally, as we conclude this audiobook summary on Skin in the Game, we wanted to leave you with one last crucial quote, a closing quote from Skin in the Game that we believe here at FlashBooks is really applicable to any dimension of life and to any individual, no matter where you are, who you are, where you live, what your economic standing is. It's really something that any of us can really take away from this author and from the book he's written. Here we go. Quote, "Let us return to pathemata, mathemata, learning through pain. And consider its reverse, learning through thrills and pleasure. People have two brains, one when there is skin in the game, one when there is none. Skin in the game can make boring things less boring. When you have skin in the game, dull things like checking the safety of the aircraft because you may be forced to be a passenger in it cease to be boring. If you are an investor in a company, doing ultra-boring things like reading the footnotes of a financial statement where the real information is to be found becomes, well, almost not boring. Unquote.